Today, I have the pleasure to have with me Johannes Grabowski. Johannes has been one of the co-founder of Open Bosch. Just to give you what has been the path that Bosch Group had in the world of open innovation. They started over 10 years ago in 2007 on the CVC side. We've been one of the first big international companies to launch a proper CVC fund, and currently, probably 14, 15 years later, they have reached the fifth fund. That is also a sign of the big progress that they have made. And down the way, they noticed that the deal flow they were analyzing and assessing for investment purposes might have some potential value also for the business unit of Bosch. And that was probably the spark that triggered Open Bosch, that is the venture client unit. So again, Bosch, I believe, is a very, very interesting use case of a corporate that started the open innovation journey through the CVCR, and down the way they added the venture client piece to the equation. And today, I think we can definitely have the opportunity to deep dive into this genesis, and particularly also what has been the regional result that the venture client unit has been putting forward with Johannes, and who is one of the person that has been on board in Bosch when they launched Open Bosch, and now is currently leading the initiative. Johannes, welcome.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Alberto, for giving me the opportunity to talk about it, to talk about what we are doing, and for inviting me. It's really a pleasure.
Actually, the interest is on our side because, as you know, we have the goal of trying to understand who is doing properly or you're putting properly into execution certain models. And today, the venture client, I believe, is one of the pillars of solid open innovation strategy. I believe is one of the few initiatives that we know that can deliver results, but obviously the details, and particularly the way these initiatives are implemented makes a lot of difference. So I think it would be super interesting for me and for our audience to understand exactly what triggered the decision for Bosch to launch Open Bosch, and how you guys put it in place, and now how it's been evolving and nurturing over the past few years. Because if I can remember, we go back to 2018 as the decision to launch Open Bosch.
Exactly. Exactly. And I mean, there are two perspectives that I could talk about. One is more the industrial or the general evolvement, how working together with startup works. Overall, Bosch is a deep tech company. We are doing tech. And so, of course, startups are very, very relevant for Bosch. And it was always a question, how do we make use of who's out there? How do we benefit of this whole venture capital out there, of the best people out there? And how can we bring that value to our customers as well? How can we contribute to their success? So out of that, Bosch has so many experiments in that space, how to do it. And we did accelerators, we did entrepreneurship programs. So Bosch has a variety of innovation sets who are somewhat connected and tapping into these resources. Especially, I think in 2018, the question was for Bosch, okay, given that situation, we want to tap into these resources, how can we do that more properly? And we already had accelerator programs. We already had our corporate venture capital in place. And it was clear, that these tools are great, but they are not covering the whole aspect, the whole ranges. What we have experienced that, you have, when you're going into innovation, you always have the same problems. You have people that are in the core units. They are completely focused on their business, on their day-to-day operations, and that's really what they get paid for. And they have very little capacity to really deal with innovation. But innovation can only happen if it's touching the core. So how do you overcome that? And we were basically in 2018, we were scouting and looking for models of successful models, who had done that, who could bring outside startups really touching core operations. And not dancing innovation in a form, but really, really integrating with core units who had done that already successfully. And we, of course, stumbled across that venture client model that was previously coined by BMW.
Yes.
They were the first ones. Yes. They were the first ones who coined that term, who said, okay, let's call that venture clienting. And we have taken a look. We have, done our due diligence. We asked for startup. Is that really true? Was something coming out from that, from your perspective? Of course, it was a little bit tough to get really a good due diligence back then. But basically, every pointer we got was, yes, that's a model that works out pretty well. And it fell into a sweet spot within Bosch as well, because Robert Bosch Venture Capital, we are very, very strong in investing, and we have also a very good, not only a strategic view, we also have kind of like a financial view on our investments. So that was the ideal combination, because Robert Bosch Venture Capital already has a deal, so we know all about these startups, but also we are doing our due diligences and we are bringing startups all the time within Bosch to Bosch. And very often, our investors get the feedback, oh, this is important, this is interesting. I want to know more about this startup. What are they doing? And at that point in the past, when we only were given some introduction, very often we saw that these core people, again, their problem is they are completely focused and they have to deliver to customers, so they don't have really some time to spare. Very often these leads, they faded out, they fizzled out, just due to the reality in a corporate. Your customer wants to have something delivered. That is our priority. We need to focus on that. And so venture clienting came in as a tool to really help our core units, to make it easy for them, to lift the burden. Because really, if you want to work with a startup, it means not only talking to them and then innovation is suddenly in your business. It means you have to do some work. It's from contract negotiation, NDAs, getting through purchasing, getting a budget, getting resources, and all of that stuff is really putting a lot of, I would say it stacks up, work stacks up internally. And venture clienting is a process who makes it really, really smooth and who makes it easy. Because suddenly we had this venture clienting tool, which you could bring to the table, and then teams saw, oh, wow, actually, it's easy talking to these startups. And we have somebody who is giving us some clarity. We have somebody who's giving us some transparency, that we are not only to that startup, but we already also know why this is a good startup and maybe if there's another better startup out there. We have transparency. We have a clear legal setup. We have somebody who helps us with purchasing, and we even, add resources to the table so that in total, we lift the burden for the core units to engage. And after 2018, we tested this in 2019, and it was incredibly successful. We got so many requests from our business units, and it's rising even till today, till 2022. We are adding more and more and more and more engagements. We're adding more and more active partnerships, and we're adding more and more business impact through core units. And that
Can you
is
provide a couple of data point also, because I think is interesting to see the evolution, because based on our experience, we see that is a process that takes a while to get started, and then when it gets started, they start go faster and faster and faster, meaning producing more results, producing more collaboration, and then there's some collaboration actually got fully implemented, and then you start having the business impact. Can you give us also some numbers and again how many collaboration over the different years has been initiated, what has been the business impact over the years, some example that might make this venture client model more understandable and tangible?
more tangible. Yes. 2018, when we started, it was more a concept phase. But then in 2019, we said we want to start with activity metrics, because we didn't know about the impact. We had to basically figure this out. So we started with, let's do 5 POCs, 5 proof of concepts, and not focus too much on kind of like the outcome of that, but have the POCs running. Of course, it needs to make sense, but we are focusing on POCs first. Then in 2020, we tripled that number of proof of concepts. So we went to 50. And then in 2021, we tripled it again. And we overachieved our targets. We had around about 50 proof of concepts running. But then we recognized, okay, let's not use these activity metrics anymore. Yeah. Let's go for impact metrics, because now we really, really want to understand kind of like proof of concept is nothing that Bosch lives from. Basically, we live from the impact that we are creating. So we switched our metrics to impact metrics. And now we only have a target of impact. So a certain number of partnerships that we are generating. And we also measure the impact by really assigning a euro number to it and a maturity stage to it. I know that this is something that a lot of companies are struggling with, but we do it. We don't have it as a KPI, but we run it as an information next to our KPIs. And as of today, we are running around about 150 projects in parallel. I think half of them are in POC stage right now. And every year, we are creating several dozens of new partnerships for Bosch and several dozens of new impact cases for Bosch overall. So basically, we started with 2 people, and now we are really a huge network organization of around about 30 people within all the Bosch universe, the regions, and the business units who are taking up on that path, because at a certain point, we were getting too big, we were getting too many requests, and the impact generated was so big that actually we needed to scale. We were forced to scale.
Just a couple of metrics. How many people are the one working in the Open Bosch group?
This is a little bit tough to explain, because
yes, the core team. And then I know that there is the extended networks, and then I would like to also understand what are the roles of these people outside the network.
So if you only count those who are 100% committed to that task, in the core team, we are right now 5 people. Yeah. We have 5 people in the core team, but they are not necessarily at Robert Bosch Venture Capital. They are also in other organizations than Robert Bosch Venture Capital. And across these, we have people who are working part-time on certain cases. And this is our extended network. We call them venture managers. And we have people who come in and bring in resources so we can really drive these projects, because as you know, this is a lot of project management around every single project. So therefore, we created another role. We called it venture associates. And for these venture associates, right now we have also external support here. 27 Pilots is supporting us in this case at the moment. And it's around about, I would say, maybe in total with our internal resources and 27 Pilots is around about 6 people now who are doing only project management for that. So in total, if you add up everything, the whole network comes to somewhat around 30 people in Bosch
Yes.
who are doing and driving this task.
And what's the difference between the venture associates and venture managers?
Yeah, something we have learned pretty early was that, doing a proof of concept with a startup is kind of easy. It doesn't hurt. You can do it. You have to get some resources for that, of course. Once you have it, you can do it. But that doesn't mean that things get adopted. That doesn't mean that really after the POC, there's a continuation. So to overcome that, you need to have somebody who's really close to the organization who runs a POC, who can hook into the management, who can understand the strategic relevance of that, who can transport it in euro to the management, who can prioritize that, and who can really, really say what is worth progressing, what is worth to pick up on. And that is the venture manager. So the venture manager is really someone a little bit more senior, connected to management, who can really drive these things to adoption. That is the venture manager role. And this must not be necessarily 100% person dedicated to that. It very often hooks into other tasks as well, pretty well. So, this is a venture manager.
So it's the connection with the business unit in order to secure adoption.
Exactly. It's exactly the person who makes sure that we have impact at the end of the day. But of course, this guy who's creating that impact and who makes sure that we have impact, he has a lot of work on his desk and already. I mean, we are talking of people here. We are talking really of the thought leaders within Bosch. They have their desks full, and everybody in your own organization, your thought leaders as well. They're incredibly busy. So we didn't want to put any burdens on them, like organizing meetings, make sure that NDA is signed, setting up and discussing statement of work, and all of these tedious things that really eat up a lot of time, should be offloaded from their shoulders. And this is why we have the venture associate who are really operationally doing the whole thing. And by having these kind of like roles clear, we were suddenly in a place where we could scale across the organization, because ultimately that's our goal, and that's what we are still working on. We want to make venture client as normal as any other tool, as any other approach, and we want every business unit to be able to run this independent of me, of my person, or Robert Bosch Venture Capital, or anything else. This is something that is really a self-sustained methodology that has been rolled out across Bosch.
And the venture associate is part of your team, or is still in the business unit?
Most of them are part of my team at the moment, but we are switching. Also, we are building up other resources, and so it's a mixture. It's a mixed bag.
This is still understanding where to position them is pretty clear. And going back to the other important topic that you made, that is measuring impact. How do you, again, it is might be understood, but it's difficult to come to EBITDA metrics. So some POC might increase probably the effectiveness and maybe have an impact on OPEX. Some other might create some top line. How do you measure the impact, and which is also the time horizon that you use also to assess? Because if not, most of the time numbers are not material. A big organization like yours.
Yes, and that was quite a journey for us, because at a certain date, as I said, we started with an activity metrics. We were doing a lot of stuff, but we're not necessarily yet understanding what we have done. So what we did at a certain point, we said, okay, let's look at the whole history. Let's wrap up everything, and let's understand what we have done, what we have created. So we took roundabout, I think, the latest 200 projects that we have done at a certain time, and we're looking at them, and we were looking back, okay, what kind of impact did we have? And we created actually 26 different kinds of impact that we would have. It could be it was so diverse. It could be really from just making production leaner to making it easier to hire new talents. It was really, really diverse. And out of these 26 classes of impact, we said, okay, what's really interesting for our management? Because ultimately, we're a service organization. We're doing that to create some impact. We cannot, have 26 classes. So we've all boiled them down to only 3 categories of impact. It's only 3 categories of impact. The first category that we have is we have the impact calculated in cost saving. We are saving money because we are partnering up. That is something that we can do very often. If we make our production leaner, if our cycle time drops, that's a good impact, and we can calculate that in a means of money. If we don't need to have additional weeks of simulation time in our engineering, that's a cost saving that we can calculate. But then we have a second class, and that second class is enabled revenue. And this is kind of like if we think about our next products that we want to bring to market, they are not consisting 100% of startup technology, but they are enriched by it. Most of the cases, we take a feature, we take startup technology and implement it as a feature for our next generation. And there we have an enabled revenue. And in that, we don't want to, in that case, we don't think about, okay, what kind of like percentage of revenue can we attribute it to the startup because we cannot possibly calculate that. There is no real good way to do that without basically having 3 more people working on each case, that doesn't add to the value creation, basically. So we just said, let's take the revenue that we're making out of it and call it enabled revenue. And then there's a third category, which is important for Bosch, and this is time to market. How many time did we save by partnering up? Either because we had to do it ourselves, or we could enter the market easier, or we could get savings earlier. It could be one of these 3 buckets we want to quantify. So the first bucket, cost saving, enabled revenue, or time savings. And one of these buckets you have to give a number because our management wants to have numbers. You cannot go to your management and come with a lot of flowery description. What is everything about value creation here and new distributor and access to talent, blah, 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 blah. They don't understand that. They don't have the time for that. You have to give them one solid number, and then you can add some flowers to it. And that's the reason why we did it. So another thing that we have done, which was very important for that KPI, was, with these impact classes, you have to give a maturity class to it. Because a partnership unfolds over time, especially if you think about revenue enabling. If we think about our next generation products for automotive, it could be 3 to 4 years down the line when we're making any revenue to it. Until then, it's unclear if there's even any impact until that date. So you have to give it kind of like a number, or you have to give it a different class. So we defined 3 classes. One class was, at the moment, it's fully PowerPoint. Second class, parts of it is realized already because we already got some revenues from it, or we already get some cost advantage from it. And the third class is, everything is fully realized. That are the 3 maturity classes that we defined. So for us, we defined this kind of like 3 impacts with 3 maturity classes. It's already sophisticated enough for our management to understand, but it's not too much, so we can still handle it. And the operations is still possible without gold plating our documentation here.
And for, obviously, again, the most complicated ones are when you are betting on the future, right? And again, the value is ahead to deliver, and most of the time is ahead of the curve. And maybe you have a return might be in 3 to 5 years.
Yes.
And how do you potentially assess the impact? You make a sort of potential estimation of what could be the size of the business. Which number do you provide your management team with?
I think that's very easy for us, because right now we don't come up with any new number. We are just taking what the project already has. So if that is an innovation project, they are running a bigger budget somewhere, so they have to tell management anyways what kind of like revenues they expect in the future. Mm-hmm. So we basically copy paste that number and say, okay, this is what we enable. Okay. Because we are only working with a startup if it's really making sense. We are not working with a startup because it could be good, it's a nice to have, only if it's a must have. So without the startup, the whole project calculation couldn't come true or would look completely different. And by that, we can say, yes, this is enabled revenue. We contributed to that revenue. But again, the startup is never the whole and only source of innovation. Yes. There are other parts to it, and that's why we do it a little bit easier approach.
Got it.
But maybe, Alberto, something that I have to say, because you asked that question. We are doing something that we called a venture client roundtable. Where we're inviting once in a while all venture client units that we know. And we're meeting with them. The next meeting, I think, is happening in February with around 50 different venture client units. So that is something that's extremely new. In 2018, we only knew of about one other venture client unit. And in 2020, almost all of the big corporates have it. They have some form of venture client unit. So we are always talking to all these venture client units and asking about best practices, learnings, how can we interact? How can we even, increase our partnerships over this venture client unit approach? So one thing I've learned is that most of the venture client units out there are focusing completely on strategic impact in means of product, of revenue. So most of them are kind of like chasing the big bets. It's about product innovation. How do we set up our next level product, and how are we more innovative than our competitors? How can we gain market shares out of that? That's what I would say 80% of venture client units are chasing. But something I have learned is that the value of startups can be quite different. It's not really only about this revenue enabling, and this revenue enabling has a long time scale. I mean, we are talking about years until this really comes true, until you really can say, yes, it's an impact. And some of these venture client units right now are running into a big trap. And the trap is that next year, when the recession hits, management will ask, okay, what's the outcome? And then they will say, yeah, we have something in our product pipeline, and it's materializing in 2025 or 2026. That is the death of all innovation approaches that I've known previously. So I think most of them need to prepare and embrace or calculate for that moment of impact. And you can do that very simply with the venture client model by not only focusing on product, but also focus on process. If we are running a project, with a startup, cost down process with a startup, we can kind of immediately contribute to cost down process costs within Bosch. That means, we easily, and we sum up these things, and this is not the biggest impact. We are talking about, I would say this year we have done around about 15 cost down things. I have to look that up, but they all have an impact of around 1 million to 10 million per year. But if you add that up, you have something that you can immediately give to the organization. Yeah. It's not waiting until it's really creating some impact. And so I constantly advise also the other venture client units, have good portfolio management, have some big long-term bets, but also add up the smaller bets where you can harvest impact immediately to please the management, because they need to know that we're not wasting time until something happens some year, but they can get out of it right away.
I would go even probably a bit more radical than what you just said. So I believe that at the beginning you were mentioning that large organizations have different tools, and different tools have different purposes. And I strongly believe that the venture client, in his proper design, has the goal to support Horizon 1 innovation. That is something that might be delivered substantially, something that is servicing the core business, as you said, and is supposed to deliver short-term impact. Because if you start looking at Horizon 2 and Horizon 3, I believe there are some other tools that are definitely better designed to do that. One is the CVC, for example, you already have. And again, I think also the genesis of the venture client side Bosch has been recognizing that the investment that you did were in something that were too much ahead of the curve, too much ahead of the business, and you need to have something that was definitely more closer in terms of time horizon, closer to the business. And then another one might be the venture builder, assuming that the venture builder as a model works, because again, there's a lot of attempts in the market, but none of them actually have proven concrete results. Then I think what you're just saying is that fostering of new product innovation or avenue enabling innovation that is moving from H1 to H2 and H3. That's something that can be done because the venture client might be potentially supporting what substantially are internal R&D effort. And then it's something that some organizations are actually doing, putting the venture client at service also of the R&D, but that is a different task and different goal, and probably requires totally different metrics also to be measured, because at a certain point you are servicing the R&D, and in servicing the R&D is something that at a certain point take the R&D metrics in place. But I think that the core of the venture client is servicing the core business, pardon the
Exactly.
and that I believe is what we typically help most of our customers to design, because it's something that today is no longer a black box. It perfectly works. In 3 years, you get results. There is written, and you are able to show results to your management. At the end, is what you can definitely save your life, because
Exactly.
all of you guys are measured by results at a certain point. And in large organization, sometimes there is a governance reshuffle, and all the prior decisions, whatever they were back strongly or not less strongly, are re-put on the table. And if you have not been able to show results and provide some concrete numbers, you might be facing the trap that you were mentioning before.
Yeah. So I agree on all of what you said. I think venture clienting is a perfect tool for Horizon 1 and 2. I even try to stay away from Horizon 3, to be honest, because venture clienting is not the best tool in Horizon 3, from my perspective and from my experience,
Because you're definitely working with the business unit, you need to put them something that is ready to be deployed. So you're talking about not even startups, you're talking about scale-ups that are mostly is a so sophisticated vendor selection, what you're doing. Obviously, it requires a certain level of imagination, identifying the needs that are not the structures typically in the old-fashioned procurement process. But that's what you actually are doing. And then if you go to a different level, I believe that you're doing a different job. That said, I'm seeing a certain organization, but still jury's out, that are start using the venture client to complement the R&D effort. But again, it's a different, it's the same job, but servicing a very, very, very different goal. And that requires probably also partially different tools and totally different metrics to be measured.
Yes. And this is also some learning that we have done, very early. We were kind of like working with any startup, but then we recognized, oh no, wait a second, we cannot work with really the early startups. That doesn't make sense, because we are not adding value to them. Since we are now have a short-term horizon, and we can only work and bring benefit to a startup who has understand how to work with a big corporate, who knows about the timescales, who know about how to deal and interact with them, and who can bring really value to the table. So at a certain time, and today we are more picky on the quality or let's say the maturity of a startup. We want to see a solid funding, at least of 10 millions. That is a good number to have, and some good investors in the background, because we really want to make sure that these guys know their business, and we don't want to be the first ones. No, really the first ones that where startups are exploring their business with.
Yeah, again, at the beginning, let me quote you when you say that you see most of your business unit people fade away, or they got excited and they fade away. And typically, this fading away typically happens when they find something that is not ready to be deployed, because they don't have time. They don't have the luxury of time. They already are focused on what they are doing. And then if they start something that might, in a short period of time, can be implemented, and that should be deployment ready, industrial grade, they may consider. But if you find something that is in the early days, just a concept or something that is not structural or is not industrial proof, again, they just...
This is one reason, definitely. But the other reason why people are not picking up and things are fading away is because, to be honest, a startup is always a risk. And even if it has a lot of funding, getting it implemented in a Bosch environment means Bosch has to take up some risks. So first of all, a lot of startups are overpromising. Most of our startup POCs that don't come into a good state. And right now we have an adoption quote of around about 60%. So out of 10 POCs we do, 6 we are progressing to a partnership level, which we increased over the years deliberately. But 40% are still dying after the POC, because just for most reason is it was overpromising, it was overhyped, it didn't materialize. And our business unit people, our core unit people, they have a very, 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 very good antenna what is working and what is not working. And it's not like they are pitching to investors. They are suddenly pitching to technical experts on their level who suddenly understand all of this, and where buzzwords don't count anymore. Everything that counts is, can they do it or can't they do it? And that is something, where our experts are very realistic. And so if there's a risk involved, they know it, they feel it. And then it's a very rational decision for any engineer to say, okay, I could continue with that startup, but it will take some effort from my side, or do I invest my time in some other cases where I can get a faster impact, or where it's needed. So, and this is really the value of venture clienting, coming in and saying, no, we take the burden away from you. We lift all that nasty work off your shoulder, and suddenly they are free to engage and to explore that risk. Because at the end of the day, it's always a risk to reward ratio. And of course, if there's high risk involved, there can be also huge impacts. We want to make sure that we at Bosch are exploring that and have a very, very concrete understanding of that before we actually engage or don't engage.
Can you make an example? How do you mitigate this risk by easing the burden from the business unit shoulders?
So first of all, these venture associates that we talked earlier, they come in and they organize a team. So they start with a problem deep dive, really understanding the problem at hand. Then they start with the impact calculation. Okay, what could be the impact? Is it worth going on to it? They arrange all the meetings with everybody engaged. The venture manager comes in, does a lot of stakeholder management, brings in purchasing that we need at a certain stage in the process. Then we run a POC, that we kind of like, that we can also, where we add with our resources to it. And then on that POC, after that POC, we can really see, did they overpromise or did they not overpromise? Can the team work together? Did we manage to build up trust? Because only if we have answered these 3 questions, we can go into any meaningful negotiation. And this is where our technical experts know it. If you meet a startup and they are overpromising, they are telling you anything, and in our technical person's mind, expert's mind, it's always like, most likely they can't do it. But suddenly there comes in an organization who said, okay, let's try it. It's not a risk for you. We decrease the amount of time that you have to spend on this case, because all of that negotiation, legal, purchasing, we take away from you. You don't need to care about that. You just care about your technical expertise. And this is where we want to have our engineers. We want to have them where they are perfect with their expertise. And the rest of it is a venture client unit that takes away that burden. And then, after the proof of concept, we can make an educated decision to continue or not to continue.
Who pays for the POC? Open Bosch or the business unit?
It's very, very, we have all models, whatever works. The only thing that we need to make sure is that we are doing things on time, so that we are not wasting weeks in discussion, where the budget is coming from. But some POCs are still paid by Open Bosch itself, but not all of them. We have a lot of ways and a lot of models that we are applying.
Okay, so there is not a specific rule. So
there's not a specific. We have a budget.
In our experience, we see them both, and there are pros and cons for both of them. So
yes,
just wondering what is your expertise here. But I think you confirm my assumption that there is not the perfect way, because if the venture client unit is absorbing the cost of the POC, it's definitely easier for the business unit to move forward, because again, they don't have to worry about budget allocation, but at the same time they feel that it's not something that is their own, and probably also the level of engagement is not that strong. On the other hand, if you put on the business unit shoulders, sometimes takes a lot of time.
Exactly. And this is, therefore, the knowledge of the organization is very important. And Bosch is active in not only automotive, we are active, in whitewares, we are active in energy and building, we are active in industrial consumer goods. So, and every of these segments have different organizations and playbooks. So we have some organizations which are more hierarchical. We're really getting any budget that was not planned in the planning 1 year before is extremely tough. And there we need to help out, because we don't want to break things just because the organization is not yet agile enough to pick up on them. But we have other segments where we have more kind of like, where you have more degrees of freedom, where people can operate freely. And there we don't want to pick up that burden, because we know they have a way how to deal with it. But you really have to know your organization and have to look at the case, because as you said, we want to have them being responsible for it. So they, at the end of the day, should pay for it. But we have to walk the speed of the organization at the end of the day.
Yeah. Final question for you is the relationship with the CVC unit, I think, where you have been originated. I believe your Open Bosch is still Robert Bosch Venture Capital Initiative, right?
Yes, it is. It started out at the CVC, at Robert Bosch Venture Capital, but it has grown far above it over the years. But still, it's so vital, it's so important. And the reason is, that if you want to create impact through startups, not all problems, not all people are really usable or capable or at the right time for doing that. So really the bottleneck of venture clienting is finding the right need at the right time. That is the toughest thing of venture clienting in total. Now that is the biggest bottleneck. So our venture client unit helps us tremendously with that, because they are constantly bringing new startups in the organization, asking experts for their review on startups. And by that, they pick up really some demand, some needs, which otherwise would have not surfaced. Because people don't think, oh, there is a new solution. Oh, this is really disruptive. And suddenly, they pick up leads, which we did not see before. So that is a huge, huge value, that suddenly, all these investors who are doing investments externally dig up the internal needs of the organization, which were not formulated in that concrete way, in that specific way. Of course, we have high-level strategies, but a partnership you cannot do really on these high-level strategies. You have to do it on a project need basis. As you said, it's Horizon 1, and 2, you know, where you have to be more specific. So our investors, they really dig up all of these leads. That is one benefit. And the other benefit is, you know, by having a venture client unit attached to a venture capital unit, we can bring in the opposite value as well. By working with a startup, we understand if it makes sense investing in that startup, because this is the most insightful way how to do a due diligence is working with a startup and really getting to the really details. Is a team really capable? Are they at that stage? Are they really doing what they said they would do? And that adds a completely different set of benefit for investments as well. And of course, for the startup, you know, it's nice to know that if they engage with us, we are connected to that venture capital, and that might give them access and benefits besides the collaboration. They know that they are close to also the investment case. And so I think every party involved has so many gains. You know, the venture client unit gains from the investors gain from every POCs, and the startups, they benefit from that combination.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a good point, and I will steal your quote. That is that working with startup is the ultimate due diligence. I think it's a pretty good one, and I will use it again. So Johannes, thank you a lot for this conversation. Congratulations for this Venture Client Award as part of the Corporate Startup Stars annual awards. I think it's been fully deserved, and then definitely will stay in touch for monitoring the evolution, because as I've seen, things are continually evolving based on what you see working and what you see not working, as this is the case with open innovation. That is not something, it's not science, it's just still is a playbook when a lot of pages are still to be written, and so we'll need to find the right formula to make it work. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Alberto. So now we kind of cut it, right?